start saying, I need better treatment plans. So it's another way that things improve naturally because you know you're going to be using them as opposed to just clicking boxes when you're in your office saying, yeah, these. Some people click all the boxes, figure I must need something. But you guys did a pretty good job of targeting it. Okay. So this is knowing what we know. These are some, I'm sure you can't read these in the back and they're not in your handouts because I destroyed these before I gave them a plane. They were charts that were sent to me, they're redacted, but I still don't like to have them around. So here, I'm going to read the goal and objective. You can just, we're not picking on anybody, we're just trying to say, would anything change as a result of what we've been talking about? So the first goal is I want to learn more DBT skills. Now normally I would say, that the client wouldn't come in and say, my goal is I want to learn more DBT skills. But this is a person, this was actually a treatment plan update or review. This person's been in DBT. So it's possible that she really finds value in learning DBT and things. But if we had asked her the question, we still have this particular area that you're struggling with, where do you want the outcome to usually address that? She wouldn't have said this. Right? This is more the open-ended question, what do you want out of treatment? And then someone might say something like this. And then the objective is client will increase knowledge of DBT skills and increase the use of the skills from 2 times a week to 5 times a week to impact mood regulation, interpersonal skills in the next 6 months. So there is a verifiable, by discussion with the client, measurable change in her level of use of the actual DBT skills. She may know them, the question is, does she use them? So I would be okay with that as long as we actually go back on a regular basis and ask about that and measure that. So this is the other place that the gap happens, is even if we have good objectives, you look through progress note after progress note after progress note, and there's no discussion with the client about their progress related to the actual goals and objectives. The progress always has to do with more general things, with client seems to be engaging well in treatment, and so we're not, it's sort of like why do we bother to develop when we don't do them. Makes sense? Okay, the next goal is, I'd really like, this is that adult female mental health outpatient, I'd really like to feel better. She does have depression, and I can definitely see that being in the person's own words. If we had asked her the question, what do you want the outcome to be as we address your depression? The objective, sign a contract for safety, agreeing to no harm, self, others, follow up with community resources for ongoing support within 72 hours. So what do you think about that objective?
Pretty short term.
Well, it's pretty short term. It's also not a measurable outcome. I mean, this is really almost part of our interventions and interactions with the client. It's the kind of thing we'll put at the end of a progress note saying, she's got this issue, we want her to follow up in 72 hours with whoever, but it's not, related to her depression. Getting a contract for safety signed and following up with community resources isn't an outcome, it's something we want the client to do. In our models on treatment plans, there's a place that says the client will. What that sort of means is, this is a two-way kind of partnership, so what we need you to do is show up for treatment, do assignments, be committed, but it's not part of the goals and objectives, it's just part of what we'd like the client to do. If it's children's and family work, we say what the client and family will do. The things we'd like them to do to support getting outcomes. But when you get to the goals and objectives, they're measurable outcomes in terms of how we know things are working. Now, having said that, this is a treatment plan for one person. So, we've got some measurable ones up here. When we get down to the actual symptom kind of goal, that's where we don't have an objective that really is going to help us measure whether or not she's progressing in terms of the depression. And again, the reason I say this is thinking to the next step, which is progress notes. And if we're going to go back in a couple of months, 2 months, and we're doing work with this person and say, let's see how you're doing with progress against the main reason she's here, which is her depression. The only thing we have to review progress against is whether or not she signed this contract for safety and followed up with community resources in 72 hours. So that's not going to be useful after 72 hours to help us measure progress. So it's like it's almost like we cross our T's and dot our I's, but we forget the bigger picture in terms of why we bother to do this stuff in the first place. The next goal is I want to lose weight in a healthy manner, enjoy spring and summer weather, and make good use of exercising my body over the next 6 months. So, we can have this goal, it's okay. not related to an identified behavioral health need. Certainly in our interventions and things, if we're listing the other ones, you can always list extra objectives if this person's weight loss is something she wants to work at. So you just have to meet the minimum requirements. The objective then, though, is apparently going to be something related to her meeting this weight loss thing. So the objective is client will acknowledge and demonstrate understanding of the recovery model. Client has drive towards treatment as evidenced by active participation in the behavioral health assessment process and treatment plan development with staff to determine the level of care needed and discuss treatment options and preferences for a successful recovery plan. So what we're seeing is all sorts of internal rules in our head for what an objective is and what it's supposed to happen, do with a goal. So would people agree that that goal objective sort of doesn't make much sense, so we're not going to be able to use it as we progress in treatment, to measure it. There were 3 objectives related to this goal about the weight loss, which it seemed backwards to me. It seemed like you'd want to have a couple of objectives related to I want to feel better with the depression, but all these objectives were under the goal I want to lose weight. The next objective is client will report increasing life-enhancing behaviors and identify or reduce unhelpful behaviors in daily living by increasing daily application of interpersonal effectiveness with stress tolerance and so forth, so forth, so forth. There's a whole lot of stuff in there that we're not going to be able to measure against, and then also I don't think has anything to do with her weight loss goal. And then the last objective has to do with understanding the benefits of medication. So you can see that people are writing a lot. It's not for lack of effort that this is a problem. We're writing more than I think you have to write. We don't get paid by the pound. We just need to succinctly write what it is. But you can see we're sort of missing the point in terms of the reason the treatment plan gets developed and how it could be helpful when we're working with the client. The next one is, this is a 65-year-old female. She's homeless, also has depression and anxiety. Will obtain and maintain stable housing. So I can see this being among the issues that the client, she is homeless, so it's an identified need in the sense that her mental illness has resulted in her being homeless. This is an important thing. What do we want the outcome to be? The client will obtain and maintain stable housing. If it was in the client's words, she'd probably want to say, I'd like to get some stable housing. Objective, client will learn and utilize skills necessary to obtain and maintain stable, affordable housing. Client will be stably housed within 180 days. So the client will be stably housed in 180 days is measurable enough. Client will learn and utilize skills necessary to maintain it. That's one of those fuzzy statements that we're going to have a tough time measuring against. Just because, is that 1, is that 2, is it 3, is it what kind of skills? And again, the DLA can help us a lot here because there are specific areas in the DLA that would clearly relate to your ability to maintain stable housing. So it's a great tool for that because depending on what our particular issues are, we would select those weaknesses, those scores of 3, 3.5, and help remove them. Here's another goal. I would like to be happy and see the brightness instead of the darkness. I would like not to worry so much. That's in the client's own words. I can very much see that being an answer to what do you want the outcome to be as we address your depression. So that's a great goal. Objective, the client will specify what's missing in life to cause depression, deeper causes of panic, stress, and anger. The client will report increased levels of comfort and ability to talk and or think about trauma without emotional turmoil. Process weekly in therapy, ongoing 180 days. So, any thoughts?
I like that ongoing.
Well, the ongoing is good, but at least one thing I didn't mention is, let's say you're talking about simple, like abstinence, like a person can remain abstinent. Well, if they have a week of abstinence, or a day, we don't say, yay, success, let's discharge you, right? We would want to say that achieve abstinence and to continue to be abstinent for X period of time, so that we know that it's sort of stuck. The problem is, it's sort of like having an objective that says that, this child will be more respectful of their parents. That opens up a whole can of worms. Who defines respectful? It's different from the child's perspective, the client's perspective, the parent's perspective, my perspective. It's better to sort of pick an area and say, let's pick our battles. So here's a sheet. Every day after dinner, you remind the child to do their homework for a half hour. You remind them once. And then you guys work out how many times that happened. So maybe it happened 2 times, maybe it happened no time. But it's not like we've got a whole day. Because what happens is a child can be doing well. That morning they give the parent a big hard time. So we ask the parent, how's it going with them being more respectful? It's terrible, he argues with me all the time because they had a bad day. So what we're trying to do is help them see that if they apply the things we're teaching them, that will in a gradual way work. There's just too many, it's okay to have some compound objectives where you can say they'll learn 3 triggers and a coping mechanism for each. But this is sort of a mouthful in terms of what is it exactly that we're going to use to decide if it's helpful or not. Like a client will report increased comfort level and ability to talk or think about trauma without emotional turmoil. Okay, the next objective is client will verbalize an increased understanding of anxious feelings and their cause. Develop and implement appropriate relaxation and cognitive diversion activities to decrease level of anxiety. Client will decrease symptoms of anxiety from 5 days per week to 2 days per week in 180 days. So if we have a way to measure anxiety, we're using the tool, but that last sentence is good. A lot of the other stuff really is part of our interventions in the interactions with the client about how we get to that. Now, if you did want to say, the client right now won't verbalize this, we always think of it in terms of, do we have an intervention that's going to help make this happen? Do we think our work together is what's going to cause this to happen, not things we're just telling the client to do. I want to see if medications will help me balance everything out. So again, I'm not sure how this extra answer came up. And sometimes this is our effort to say, one of the interventions we're given is medication. We need a goal for that. Okay, but if you had a general symptom reduction objective, right? You can have therapy that can be helping to produce that. You can have case management that's helping to produce that. You can have medication that's helping to produce that. You don't need to develop objectives around interventions. You need to think more, what is the target problems? And then, so for example, we can't list medication, but the client will learn the triggers for our depression and learn at least 2 coping mechanisms for each trigger. Medication isn't going to help that. Right? You give medication to people forever, and they're not going to learn triggers or coping strategies. So for that one, you'd want group therapy or individual therapy or whatever. But if you're talking about the major symptoms, remember we had those different classes of objectives, the one that actually said a reduction in symptoms? For that one, individual therapy can contribute to that, group therapy can contribute to that, and certainly medication management. So we don't want to get into saying, whoops, we got a group that this person's in, or they're on medication, we need a medication goal, or medication objective. You know, we don't have to back into it that way. Think more about of those targeted, identified needs. Where does medication fit in if it does? And if it does, it should relate to the goals and objectives around that symptom reduction. Questions? Yes?
With this one, it's mixing depression and anxiety. Would you recommend problems separating depression and anxiety versus trauma?
Well, the trauma, usually we get into more about the impact of trauma. So people can have traumatic experience and not have any symptoms. We tend to treat the people who had trauma and have traumatic symptoms. And their symptoms are usually anxiety, depression, and some other things. So those are the things that we're attacking. To separate out anxiety from depression really depends on whether you feel your interventions are going to tease out those two, right? In other words, you have separate kind of, are they so intertwined, the anxiety and the depression, that our interventions are really going to be focused around a goal that this person feel less anxious and depressed because they're so intertwined. If you feel that there's an anxiety component that's really separate, has a different reason than the depression, then what I would do is sort of separate those and say these interventions are going to be around goals to reduce your anxiety as opposed to a more generalized depression, if that makes sense to you. We really just want to think in terms of those identified needs are how does, we say you have a mental illness, we say you have a diagnosis. What are the things that are either subjectively distressing to you, like depression, or functional deficits that are resulting from that, or behaviors that are getting you in trouble with the law or needing you to go to the hospital, that sort of thing. So what are those main targets, and let's develop goals around those. So the decision, I'm sure different people with different orientations or different clients with different etiologies for their illness, some might say we need to separate the anxiety and depression, so we're going to use some different approaches for that. Others might say they're so intertwined that I'd be, nitpicking to say let's figure out different interventions for the two and let's just see if we can decrease our anxiety and depression. And you can use 2 measures for that. You can use the gains and the PHQ-9 and still look at the 2 measures for outcomes. See, I just think we're sort of at the point where that sort of nuanced question is sort of like me and my tennis game. I'm not the point where the equipment matters. right? In other words, like, I got a lot of work to do before I have to worry about what kind of racket I buy. So that kind of question is a good, sophisticated question, and if you understand the concepts as a clinician, you can apply it there. You're seeing bigger kinds of problems than that. And so most of the time, I tend to see people combine the anxiety and depression because they're not comfortable. They really don't think that they're going to use different kinds of interventions or have to separate that. If they're really separate components, it's fine to have two. Any other thoughts on that question? Yeah.
I just had a question, especially if you're talking about this. Do you have any suggestions for when you have one clinician who's creating the treatment plan and then a different one who's actually going to be the counselor?
Right. So the question was, sometimes, frequently, we have the issue where one person develops the treatment plan and then other people are actually needing to follow the treatment plan. Even a therapist, you might have one professional do the treatment plan, but they're not going to be the one assigned the case to actually work with them. And this is where we all have to know what we do. In some organizations, treatment plan development is relegated to case managers. It's almost like none of the rest of us want to do it. So really the highest ranking clinical person on the team should be doing the treatment plan. The one who's got the broadest view. It doesn't always happen that way. And so the discussion that starts to happen is when you get a treatment plan that you have to follow, you need to start having conversations with the person developing it around whether or not, like you're actually assigning interventions for another person. And you're also, so if you have a person with a very different clinical orientation than you do, how do we work that out? Okay? And it's kind of a question for the organization. We have some organizations where teams develop treatment plans, some organizations where it's much more homogeneous in terms of orientation, others it's not, and they use DBT, they use, curriculum-based kinds of stuff, and so they know pretty much for certain, identified needs, what's going to happen. But when you have one person doing, if I have to follow a treatment plan and review progress with you against a treatment plan someone else wrote, a lot of times what I would have to do is say, we're going to do a treatment plan review for my part of this. Other organizations say, here's the people that are going to be actually on the team assigned to that person, and they contribute their part to the plan. There's different ways to handle that depending on the organization. Ultimately, what comes down a lot is if I'm working with a plan that's not workable for my piece of it, I need to revise the plan. Okay. Last one. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, any thoughts on how to deal with goals and objectives, working in a crisis unit where you're dealing with a lot of involuntary admissions, people that don't want to be there, don't want the med management or billing or, seeing the psychiatrist each day.
So they were mandated there?
Yeah, like in involuntary admissions.
So mandated by who though? Do you have like a mandated treatment law here where people meet certain criteria, they're forced to get treatment? Or is it more like probation and parole, or saying you have a choice?
Yeah,
You can go to-
not probation and parole, like.
Well, they're 213, yeah.
Crisis
It's
like, yeah, like, you are a risk to yourself, so you have to be here.
Okay, okay. So what do you expect will get done during that? What's your hope? How long is the program? Varies?
It can be like basically as little as 72 hours.
Okay, and up to?
2 weeks.
Okay. So what do you hope will happen in that time?
Well, at minimum, that they will basically not be a risk to themselves or others anymore.
Okay. So what you'd have to do with people, for example, there's a couple of differences. That's the way I asked about probation and parole. So if you do substance abuse treatment or mandated treatment, and I don't know, if you don't do any substance abuse and you're under here? Okay. Okay. So very often those people didn't voluntarily come to treatment. They've got probation or parole saying, here's your choice. You can go to jail or you can go to treatment. So they think they're mandated, but really it's a voluntary choice, right? And Medicaid's a voluntary program. So it's not like they can come and just show up and not engage at all or not participate. What I tell them is, this is a choice. You're mandated in that sense, but we're only allowed to provide services on a voluntary basis. So if you're going to stay here, here's the things we're going to have to do. And sometimes I have to set goals for them. So if they don't want to set the goal, and you can talk to them about the goal. If they don't want to set one, say, I just want to get out. My goal is to get out of here. So that's fine. And now if you know what got them into trouble, you can say, well, this is the reason you got here. We think we can help you not have that happen again. and get us to the point where we're comfortable discharging you because we don't think you're a danger to yourself or others. So the last, remember the personal goals section that I talked about? So for the first part, you can state a goal in terms of what your language is essentially to say, this is what we've got to see to be able to be comfortable that we've met the goal. And at the tail end of it, you can say, so you can get out of here. Okay? So that's all they want is to get out of here. But if they're not going to participate with you around the goal, you've got to say, well, our sort of mission here and obligation is to get you to the point where X, Y, and Z so that you can get out of here. You know, if people aren't going to participate, you've then got to step in and come up with a goal. Now, do you have to do an actual treatment plans for the 72-hour piece? Okay. So you have to set a goal, and you still have to set some objectives. Okay, and a lot of times they're going to be fairly narrow. In other words, you're going to have the same kind of situations a lot. So you start to see sort of similar goals in a short program like that. The client just needs to at least understand it. So if they're not going to generate it, the person-centered part is they need to at least understand the mission for why they're with you and what you're hoping is going to happen. This is the last person. The client would like to feel good about herself and not think of herself as the lowest creature on earth. So again, this is another person with depression. I got 3 depression and anxiety cases. Objective client will provide information for assessment and diagnosis and participate in ongoing treatment planning. So that's obviously not really objective. I'm assuming that this might have been an interim treatment plan and they were going to continue to do some work for ongoing treatment planning. But in and of itself, you're right, that's not an outcome that we're hoping is going to come from treatment. And the other objective was client will report no thoughts of harming herself for X months, 4 months I guess there, and feeling good about herself at least 5 times daily for 6 months. So that objective you could use as a measurable outcome objective. As long as you have some standardized way to make, so no thoughts of harming yourself for 4 months, what I'd be giving people is a worksheet to take home so that they can think about it. It's not just counting how she feels today when she's with me, but we're getting some sense that she's pretty free from those kinds of thoughts. And then the last objective was client report mood of 8 or greater on a scale of 1 to 10 for 6 months. And again, these scales, I mean, I think you saw when you worked with Willow that a scale from 1 to 10 for depression, if you use it, you use it, you're going to get different scores for the same person, unless you've got anchors for those scales. So you really shouldn't use a 1 to 10 scale for everything. If you had a depression scale from 1 to 10, it should be anchored, right? In other words, what does a 1 mean, what does a 2 mean, what does a 3 mean? And there are already available scales out there for that sort of thing. Okay. All right, so progress notes. And this is where, again, you're going to get the most paper you generate is really in progress notes because you're seeing people all the time in any of the environments that you see people in. So the one thing, and you can tell I'm harping on treatment plan and service plans, is we really need to be aware of what it is before the person walks in.
Can I ask a quick question about I'm sorry, but it's about the intakes and all? We
Yeah.
have a lot of authorization stuff, like called a MICA, that we have to do as part of our intake process as well. And I don't know if you spoke to that, and I'm not sure when we're supposed to do that piece, or is it a separate session, or is it doing all that you just told us about?
So the question is about the non-clinical assessment piece, this sort of authorization MICA.
Yeah, because our intake process involves more than the stuff that you just showed us.
Well, I'm certainly not showing you all the questions.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely still have to do that assessment to get paid because it's just a cost of doing business. But what we've asked him to do today is help us follow the golden thread. Some of the things in the MICA are part of that golden thread because we're identifying the problems, we're identifying symptoms and that sort of thing, and that's how we're justifying the medical necessity. But those are definitely things that are still going to have to be done in the intake because that's how Medicaid pays us and how the state.
But because I got more than just what I'm showing you, I got a lot
Right.
more.
good.
I got stacks of paperwork.
Yeah.
But a lot of it were the questions that were leading up to the clinical summary. So I haven't been going through all the questions you asked. Were those the MICA?
Yeah.
All check boxes and answer yes and no,
Yes.
all these questions and all that?
Yeah.
So you need to do that with the client, right?
Right,
I mean,
absolutely.
otherwise, well, how are you getting your answers?
Absolutely.
So your question isn't that you should be doing that while you're sitting with the client, the MICA items, or there are elements of that that really the client can't benefit from participating in?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do we do this all in one, like 1 hour or 1 hour and a half session, or?
Yes. Yes.
schedule it.
And we are working on, we don't want to do 2 separate sessions because then you don't get paid. We are working on streamlining the assessment. We have no control over the makeup. The state requires that. But his colleague, Michael Flores, is working with them on the makeup. So we expect a year from now that to make more sense. Because yes, there are parts of things on the makeup that is no benefit to the client to send up remedy insert. There just really are. But we can't change that. We are changing our assessment.
So the parts that I saw, were they include the makeup
They
questions?
included the makeup.
Okay, so when I asked the question before, how long does it take you to interview a client, and how long does the whole process take, and I got the answer 90 minutes. Did that include the makeup?
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like most of the staff here are doing this, well, they're going to be truthful, within about 90 minutes including makeup. And a lot of the makeup questions are clinically relevant.
Some of them are, some of them are redundant to other.
Right, they're redundant to other elements, which is what I think Michael wants to clean up. My other question though is, are there parts there that don't require even clinical skills?
There are, and what we're trying to work on is that being something that can be done either through point of entry with a clerk or by phone or by the client with a tablet in the lobby. What are some things there that don't
Right.
require clinical
Right.
expertise?
So, because we were talking a little about that. So the idea is to cut out redundancy, so you're not answering makeup questions and then answering the same question in a different way in your clinical summary, clinical form. And then also not subjecting the client to things that have, say, sit there because I got to fill out these 10 questions that have absolutely nothing to do with us interacting. And if those things don't require clinical expertise, not having you guys do it at all. Because that stuff adds up, and pretty soon we're losing an hour or 2 a week of clinical time that we could be doing clinical work, doing work that could be done by a clerk at half the cost, or less than half the cost. And that pays for itself very quickly. Okay? All right. So the important thing here is knowing about service plan before you go. If you're going into the community, we should know what those people's goals and objectives are. If the person's coming in to see us, we should already know. After a while, we get to know them because we're using them now. But do we know what we plan at least to work on with the client when they come in, right? So we want to avoid the meandering with the client. So we want to say, just like your doctor, you know, they walk up to you hear them shuffling up to the outside of the door, and you take the file out of the door, and you're looking at it. They're catching up on where they left off. They don't remember their 500 patients. They're looking, they know you, they're looking at where they left off. They put it back in, they come in and they ask tomorrow. Because they look first. So if we don't know what the treatment plan is, or have a plan for what we're going to do, we're very likely to deal with the mini crisis of the week. So we should know, and it may change. They may tell us something that makes us shift to another goal, but we should know what they are. We have case managers and ACT team workers who say, I don't have a linkage to my electronic record when I'm in the field. They make up index cards with the goals and objectives for everybody. They know who the 10 people are going to see that day. They pull out those cards. The cards don't have names on them because we don't want that stuff floating around. They have an ID, a way for them to know who the client is. And this way, when they're going to each person, they know what their goals were and their objectives were. Because if you don't do that, it's kind of like why are we bothering to go out or why are we bothering to have them come in. And it has a lot to do with the question you're asking. So I'm from New York. So you hear people in New York say, how you doing, right? So if I walked out into the parking lot at the end on the way to the airport, and I ran into a couple of you today, and I walked up to one and said, how you doing? And you said, terrible. So first, I'm sorry I asked the question, right? Because I was just being polite, now I gotta, be careful. So I asked, what's wrong? Most of the time what we answer is, really we answer the question, how's the world treating us? We're saying this bad thing happened to me, someone I know got sick, someone I know didn't get into the college they wanted, somebody got into a car accident, whatever. We're really not, that's the usual common response to the question, how are you doing? Our clients are kind of trained when they come in to answer that question. So we say, hi, how are things going? How was your week? And they start bringing up many issues. They start bringing up good things that happen. They complain about their roommate, their landlord, their loved one. They're telling us stuff that happened to them good and bad. I listen to that and say, listen, I want to hear a little about how your week went before we get down to work. But then I'm going to ask you the question again, how are you doing? Meaning, are you applying the things we talked about? How is that working? Are you taking your medication? Are you having time? I want to know how you're doing, not how the world's treating you. I want to hear that, but what's important, because we want to retrain the clients that come in, know that's the question that's going to get asked. We're going to want to know, did they follow up? We're going to want to know, did they think about what we asked them to think about? Did it work? Didn't it work? that gets them thinking about, because when they're coming, they have more time to think about what they're going to say to you when they get into your office than you do. You're seeing one client after the other, and they're thinking of stuff they're going to tell you. And what happens is, they come in, we say, how are you doing, or how's it going? They start telling you something before you know the session's over. And we're in our office trying to figure out how to write a compliant note. So what we want to do is change that. We want to hear what's going on. If it's a real crisis, we have to attend to it. You never have to follow, the rule is you have to follow, relate your session to a treatment plan goal and objective, at least one, or explain the reason you're not. So if there's a crisis, there's something out of the blue, you're allowed to attend to that, but the note has to say why you didn't, weren't addressing anything in the plan. You just have to explain why you deviated. You don't want every note to be, here's why I deviated, and they never focus on the plan. But so it should be like a real crisis. So what it does is people start to think different. They start to come and say, did I do anything? Did I follow up what they asked me to do anyway? And it starts to get people thinking more about their role in treatment, and that we actually are taking the treatment plan seriously, and we are actually trying to help them. And if the treatment plan gets stale, if it becomes silly, we should change it. If it's not relevant anymore because new things are happening, we need to go back and say, well, what are the current issues? Now, do you guys have assessment updates? Addendum? So if a real brand new issue comes up, you can addend the assessment. Then the question is, does that identify a new need? And some assessment updates might not really indicate a new clinical identified treatment target. Like the most important person in the person's life died. Sometimes people want to put that in an assessment update so that future people who are looking at that assessment don't ask the question, how is your uncle doing? Because we didn't know that they had passed away. Yeah.
I have a question about that. So our assessment update includes a diagnostic section. So right now, the only folks who can do that are individuals from the master's level. So sometimes that leaves out our case managers, out our parapros.
Right.
In your experience, does that assessment update have that, so it does limit it to those?
The way ours is sort of, they're mostly electronic now, but if you picture it as paper, it's sort of initially a one-page thing, and our assessments are numbered. So section 1 is presenting problems, section 2 is family history, section 3 is trauma history, whatever. The update has a box there that says which section of the assessment are you updating. So you check off the section, it's listed there, so we just have to update family history, or we just have to update trauma history. Then there's a box below it that says what's the change. Then it asks the question, does this require a diagnostic change? Because if it's someone died or some other thing happened, it's got no relevance to diagnosis, why go through that part of the process? If it does, you got to flag that and make sure you get a diagnosis now. Then it says, does this indicate a new identified need, treatment target? And if it does, what is it? And then you have to go update the treatment plan, because you either have to create a new goal and objectives to deal with that issue. But that's great that you can have the assessment update, because a lot of people bury it in progress notes. There's important information in progress notes. And nobody's going to read through 500 progress notes to figure out why are we sending this person to trauma counseling suddenly when they got the problem.
So I'm asking this question specific to individual counseling for substance abuse clients, but it may have broader applicability. So if you're dealing with somebody who's in the initial stages, let's say they're in the 6-week inpatient program, or they're the first couple of weeks out, meandering with the client, finding out what is going on in their world, how are they handling it, how are they thinking about it, how could they be doing it differently, seems like an effective way. How do we not meander with the client and still, does that sense where I'm going with that?
Yeah. So first of all, we've got the assessment. We spent an hour and a half with them. And those assessments should be, the question was for people who couldn't hear it, if we're talking about like an early stage for pre-contemplative folks, substance abuse treatment, might be an inpatient program or outpatient IOP, that the meandering with the client would seem like a useful activity. To some extent, we do want to hear what's going on in the client's life and how they're handling it. So first of all, the assessment should be structured in a way to get at all the big issues around that. Right? In other words, our assessment should be covering all the relevant areas of a person's life where they've got the opportunity to let us know, do they have family, don't they have family? What are their stressors and all those kind of things. So that's what that's designed to do. It's also fine for us in the course of the work that we're doing, these things are going to come up. But we can't sort of have our original objective for 6 weeks be, we're just going to find out what's up with the client. Right? We have to have we only have 6 weeks, so we have things that we need to get done in that 6 weeks. A lot of times the goal for that is that the client will reach the point where they admit that they've got a problem and will voluntarily enter a treatment. And they'll usually tell me, good luck with that. And that ain't gonna happen. You know, I just don't want to be here. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time for those 37 DUIs, you know. It's everybody else's problem, it's not my problem. So I'll say, well, you don't have to be here. You know, it's a probation order. You have a choice to come or not. But if you're going to be here, this would be our goal if you don't have one, to get you to hopefully identify that this might be a problem for you and seek appropriate treatment for self-help. And then we set out some objectives of that, some things that they need to know and learn during those parts of treatment. And in the course of doing that, you're going to find things out about the client, but I've never found it useful to meander with the client more than a session or two. Because they'll do it forever. People will meander with you for years. You know, you have clients under private practice, your client that you've been talking to for 10 years, we've been meandering with them for 10 years. So I'm not saying, especially in a time-limited program, there's certain things we need to get done. We do want to get as much of that from the assessment. A lot of group work gets done normally in those things where people have the opportunity to talk, and the individual as part of the group note. We should be pulling those important factors out. We just, you know, and I'm not saying we don't conversate. Like I said, I would always say to people, how was your week, or how's things been going since the last time we talked? I'd like to hear about that before we get down to work. And then the most important salient issues will come up, but they know that's not necessarily what the session's going to be about. It's just so that I can catch up and make sure I'm understanding the context of what we're doing. It's easier to meander. Like I said, it can go on for many, many years. Okay. I don't know if I answered your question. You know, I'm not saying we shouldn't get to know clients, but you know, I wouldn't want to spend a 6-week program basically having it be try to flesh out some of those nuances that usually comes up. And you have to set some goals from the beginning anyway, right?
Right.
Right. You don't really have a choice about it. Okay. So you have a structure for your progress notes. These are the typical required areas in a note, both clinically and from compliance. And yours, I think, cover most of this. We'll take a look at some of it. But obviously, we need a place to write new pertinent information. So getting to the sort of meandering issue, when people bring up something salient that's new, or something that's interesting to them, particularly when you're doing collaborative documentation, they said something that they thought was important to them. We might say that's interesting to them, it's not that clinically relevant. They're going to want to see it in their note. You know, so if they had a meeting yesterday with their long-lost sister, who they hadn't seen in 5 years, and they finally met with her, they're going to want it in the note. It was important to them, so we put it in. But certainly, salient changes in mental status are required to indicate. The best models I see say, is there a significant change in mental status or not, yes or no? If it's no, which is typical, we're done. If it's yes, we need to describe how the client was different today than they normally are. The goals and objectives from the current service plan addressed. You guys have those check boxes, right? It shows up on top. All the goals and objectives. You all use the same format?
It shows on a different screen, and
that translates.
Problematic, because it would be nice if we could have it on the same screen. We're fighting with.
Okay, so ideally, but the documents I saw was on the top. So is that because when
We're
it's,
going to do the report.
so when it prints out, it looks like that? Okay. So ideally, you want to be able to print up a note for that person who would have their goals and objectives on a screen that you can just show it up. But what you do is go to another screen, and every session you indicate what you're working on. Okay. Describe the intervention provided. You guys do a good job of this. This is like terrible around the country because they usually say client reported this, client reported that, client reported the other thing. They're using quotes. And we're like, okay, now I know what the client had to say. You know, did we do anything? But you guys do a good job of that. The client's response to the intervention, you guys have a little different definition than the rest of the world. We'll go over what that is. But as long as the right content is there and you're consistent about it, that's okay. Client's overall goal, progress towards the goal or objective being addressed. So that's where we're really supposed to say, well, if we were addressing those goals and objectives, how's the client doing meeting those goals and objectives? And that's the thing that's just missing a lot. We use other language down there that's not really related to, either it's because we think the objective is dumb, or it's not an easy objective to actually report progress on, or we forget, or we tend to not report progress related to an actual goal objective that we develop with the client. And we'll take a look at some notes like that too. And then the plan, like I said, in the work that I do with a lot of peer programs, but also just the way I was trained, the plan really should be something that we want the client to do, think about, track, read, practice, and they need to know that that's one of the first things we're going to ask them about next time we see them. That's part of the how are you doing process. So we'll see the way I do collaborative documentation, we recommend it. That's the bridge between your sessions, is where do we leave off in terms of what you would. And it might also include things, let's say the client wants me to talk to their psychiatrist. I put that in the client section also. So they can expect to hear from me what I did, and I can expect to hear from them what they agreed to. Okay, so that's what the plan is supposed to. And then you can say, and our next appointment is 2 weeks from now. That's important. So as your progress notes, would you agree the sections are pretty similar to this? Right? And they call these GURP notes. Have any of you been trained on DAP notes? Right? Data assessment plan or SOAP notes, subjective. The problem with those acronyms is they don't prompt for any of the required information except for the P, the plan part. All of those acronyms have the P, saying what's the plan for what to do next. The data isn't something that's required. It's required, but it's not telling you what kind. So this is called the GURP note from item 3 down. The G is the goals. Number 4 is I, the intervention. The first P is number 4 is the intervention. 5 is the client's response. And then we've got the first P, progress, and the last one is plan. So it's GIRPP, just the goal, intervention, response, progress, and plan. And that's pretty common now around the country, different versions of this. And this is a progress note that unfortunately has the bottom of it clipped off. The plan section is clipped off. This is the model, the core model that they use in Massachusetts, Oregon, Ohio, New York. And it's just on top, it says new issues, stressors, extraordinary events presented today. If it's a new issue that requires an assessment update, there's a box there which flags to make sure that that's called for when it happens. Then there's the goals and objectives addressed, and usually this area is replaced by a list of the current goals and objectives. If not, for people using manual kinds of records, which some people still do, you have to write them in. Here's the interventions and methods provided. I don't like this particular model. This says response to intervention / progress towards goals, as though they're two, it's either or, but it's not. You have to do both, and you guys have it broken out separately. And then there's the plan. And this sequence, it turns out, is a pretty good sequence for guiding collaborative documentation. Okay, so here's the difference with progress notes and assessments and treatment plans. The assessments and treatment plans is collaborative and concurrent, right? We're actually doing some typing throughout the session rather than waiting to the end, because that's the only way it makes sense. We develop the goals here, let's type in the goal. When we develop an objective, let's type it in. With the assessment, we're not going to wait till the end. We're going to put the information in and clarify it as we go. For the progress notes, the 99% of the time, the way it works is you interact normally with the client. And what I do is I write the last note, and I've got the plan section there. Client walks in, I say, hi, how are things going? I want to hear how your week went before we get down to work. Then I say, okay, last time we left off here. These are the recommendations that you made. How did you do with that? How did you make out? A lot of times they forgot, they lost the tracking sheet. I say, okay, I'll just write it that you lost it, we'll give it to you again, that sort of thing. Then I bring up the new note and I forget the computer for the rest of the session. I turn to them, I usually have a pad out, and I'll say, while we're talking, I may jot a word or two down, just so that we don't forget to put it in our note at the end of the session. So it changes the dynamic, but they may say some important things I want to remember not to forget them. So I'll just write like single words down, that kind of thing. A number of your clients are going to, in the course of the session, say, don't forget to put that on the pad. If they said something they thought was important, or if you said something they thought was important, which is good. We get to hear what they're cueing to and that sort of thing. But I'm just making eye contact, having it. I might just jot something down. If they want to see it, I'll show them. But they already know that I'm not going to write anything in the chart that they don't know about. Then when I get 5 to 7 minutes left, usually you start with 7, but if you just want to leave 5, and if you don't finish up, you can tell them, listen, we didn't save enough time, we'll manage our time better next time. 5 to 7 minutes, I say, okay, I turn either my laptop sideways, and I have a wired keyboard or wireless keyboard so I can type. I have a monitor that I turn, I take a move their chair, whatever. And I say, okay, and then I follow this sequence. So what I say is, okay, one of the things you told me today was you had this visit with your sister. Or you talk today about the fact that you were abused, such a whatever, salient information that they bring up. And some people can type while they're talking, others will say, if I understood you right, this is what you had brought up today. And then you can turn your head away, because they've got the option to look at the screen if they want. So you're not totally disconnected from that. And then you go to the next part, and you say, if there's no change in mental status, I just check the box, I don't say anything. Then I'll say, these are the goals and objectives that we talked about, that we worked on today, and you can check those off. I take over at number 4 and say, here's what I think we did today that was helpful. You talked about X, Y, or Z event that happened. I sort of listened to you and indicated I agree that you're feeling exactly the way you should be feeling. And then we discussed or role-played some strategies that could have given you a better outcome. Or we did role-play, or we discussed skills, whatever we did. For the client response, what I do is I say, what did you think about the session today? And the usual definition of the response is how did the client seem to respond? Were they interacting with us? Were they totally aloof? Were they kind of distracted? What was the client's response there? You guys use it to report on the things the client said, at least in the 3 notes that I saw. So client response meaning, what did they say? The interventions like what I said, the response is what you said. Most places, the intervention would include things that the client said, and how we interacted with that, and that was the intervention. Because the intervention isn't always one way, right? It's the interaction we have with them. And then the response is really, how did they seem to respond to it? Did they seem to be cooperative? Did they seem like they actively were learning things? I usually just say, what did you think about today's session? Was it helpful? Was there anything particularly important, anything you didn't understand? And I'll report that. I've had adolescents cross their arms and say, I don't even want to be here, I don't care what you write. And I'll just respect that. And I'll say, John says he has nothing to say today, but the therapist feels that he got angry every time we talked about his possible role in the problems he's having with his family. Pretty soon, John doesn't want his notes to say he had nothing to say, and I'm the only one reporting what I thought. And so he starts to have things to say. We may not like what he has to say, we may have to change the wording, but we give them the opportunity. So I'm not going to tell you what to put in the response section, but it's designed to sort of say, how did the client seem to react to it? Then the client's overall progress with the goals and objectives, if you've got good objectives, what you should be able to just do is say, here was the objective. Let's talk about whether you've learned these skills. Let's talk about whether or not you are actually having a reduction in your depressive symptoms. Early on, there's not going to be a lot of progress because we just started. But as the weeks go by, people should start to see, particularly, that they are learning some skills, that they are learning the triggers, that they are doing those things. You reassess, the DLA-20 is a great tool for this, because if you use the actual anchors, not the overall anchors, but the anchors for the subscales, they know what it would take to get to the next functioning level. And so once you understand what it takes to get there, it makes it easier to do, and then you can start measuring and saying, we've really moved up a score or 2 scores in terms of this functioning stuff. And people start to say, realize that they're getting something out of treatment, even though they still may feel subjectively distressed, they're functioning better, they're learning some of the skills, and it keeps people motivated to keep working.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
As nurses, sometimes it's hard for us, or for me, to think about the therapy part of it, but here we are dealing with something totally different with
Right.
the patient.
Right.
And then we like, like for instance, a new occurrence, information would be, my medicine's not working. Why
Right.
is it not working? Is that what you-
The outline, I don't know if you use the same progress note form. When we designed it, we would have a separate form for you. That would deal with, so we'd have interim update, which is basically, are you taking medication, are you having side effects, is your diet change, that kind of stuff. And the prompts are there for that. Then the intervention might be whether or not you administered medication, you did some psychoeducation, whether you changed any prescriptions or whatever, if you're authorized to do that here. And then the plan would be the plan. So we sort of say the nature of your work is different, you're not doing therapy. And the progress for you, hopefully your intervention is listed under probably the symptom goal and symptom objectives. So you can ask people, how are you doing in terms of your depressive symptoms? Or it's fine for you to apply PHQ-9s too.
Thank you.
Sure. We have different notes for different things, like care coordination notes are different. A care coordination note, we want a place that says who agrees to do what when. So we build in a place for that. So it's easy for people to do that instead of figuring out where to put stuff.
Another, I think a lot of the great
That's sort of the equivalent to client response. And we're gonna, I don't know if I have any group notes pictured here.
The client response as well as the client behavior.
Right. For me, those are redundant kind of questions. You know, saying the client, you know, we're judging the client's behavior, I guess, in terms of did they engage, didn't they engage, were they disruptive, were they getting up and out of the room. And then the client response, again, if you define it as what the client said, that's one thing. I've just never seen it interpreted that way before. It's usually how did the client respond today. So if you've got to do it in two places, you'd have to decide, particularly if you're doing this collaboratively, what you're going to put up there, you know, in terms of that. And then under client response, where you're going to put. So under your current model, if you're talking about what the client said or some significant stuff that they said, you could put it under response. I mean, I don't know if that's is that your rule for responses, clients' verbalizations? Do you have is there a rule for that?
Everyone uses that section that way.
Okay.
That's not like a rule that everyone uses the client response section as the
What the client
information
says.
that the client gives us during session. I think that's an interpretation of the form.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Like I said, I only got 3 charts, so that most people may have used it that way. So, and I don't think it was the right way. Do you use it more the way I said, how the client
Yeah, that's how I
responded
use it,
today?
but I've seen other people use it
Right.
that way, but I don't think that's a rule. Like nobody
Okay.
told me that's how I'm supposed to write a note back.
So what you have to decide as an organization, getting back to your question in the back, is if there's a section that says client behavior, and then there's a client section that says client response, what we want folks to use. Because we want to be consistent, partly just when we read someone else's charts, we know where to look. I was saying we'd have to decide for folks that are doing group, if there is a section that says client response and there is one that says client behavior, what kinds of things do we, is that just redundant, we should eliminate one? Or, so in the individual notes, the place that says client behavior?
And that's what it's on, that's what it looks like now. We are in the process of changing those. So what we're gonna have instead is something that, looks more like the community-based that has a mental status to check off at the top,
Okay.
to check off like behaviors. But the response is supposed to be.
How do they
what we're
respond to
getting
it?
in the session.
Yeah, well, typically, like I said, the response is how did the client respond today? In the sense that were they engaging? Did they respond well? Were they out of it? Were they non-attentive? Were they angry? Those kinds of things.
Right, and so some of that will be checked. Some of that will be put into check-offs.
Okay.
And then always in other, and then places they can do a narrative to describe for.
We have to be careful with checkoffs too, because we think that they're faster, and in some cases they definitely are. But you have to think about the context, and you always want to have a little place to write something. Because when I'm doing collaborative documentation, I don't want to just be chucking off a box that says, you know, angry, you know, or you know, I want to be able to say, you know, would you agree? It seems to me you got angry at these things. You could use the checkoff. Like I said, we don't get paid by the pound. A lot of times we can reduce the amount that we write and still adequately reflect
I
the
just
time
tell you,
spent in
the
sessions.
forums committee meeting was lots of fun with one side of the table going, we want it this way, now we want
I
it this
know,
way.
I
So
know.
that was the compromise.
Right. And it's good. I don't know if you got to see any of the model forms that were developed in other states, but sometimes it can save you. And as we do new states, we pick the best one that we like of those, and so it gives a starting point at least. You know.
Yeah, we left a lot of yours. We used a couple of the CSVs that y'all worked with already just because our electronic health record created some problems for us. Like some things that y'all were able to do on one screen, we have on 2 and 3 screens.
Right.
So that was part of our hang up with some of the
Right.
changing forms.
Yeah, I've developed a lot of forms, and staff always say there's too many questions, the forms are too long, so you say, okay, here's the form, make your recommendations, and add 15 questions. If they want to know stuff, they just don't want to have to fill stuff out.
Okay, so you got to do an individual counseling with a client who is in a substance abuse program. Comes into the session, reports 3 major things going on. Is maybe he's trying to process childhood trauma. He's really worried about his wife divorcing him when he gets out, and what is he going to do about income or something like that.
Right.
So it gives you a lot of information. You talk about it for a while. Do you not put that information on the note? Usually I would put it, it's kind of what we've been going back and forth on in client response. But that's what he's bringing in and we're processing.
Right.
Are we supposed to only put his response to how we process that?
Typically, in the intervention section is where I would capture the conversation I had with the client. I don't use a lot of quotes. A lot of people think we're doing collaborative, we got to use quotes. To me, it's more powerful for me to listen to you and very succinctly summarize what you say, because it's like active listening, right? I must have heard you for me to so succinctly get right to the point you were making. So what I would do is in that part, if you would cover those 3 areas, I said the client brought up these issues about his divorce, and then what did you do about it? You know, did you make recommendations? Did you just have a discussion? Did you just validate his feelings? What did you do? The client was also, you know, we also discussed, you know, the issues with his childhood trauma. The client basically reported that X, Y, Z, you know, with these quotes. What did you do about it? So in that discussion is the intervention. Because the intervention is one way. It's not like we're giving them an injection, and that's our intervention. Right? The intervention is that we listened to them, and then we responded, we did something about it. Then for the response, I would say to the client, what did you think about today's session? What did you get at it? Was there anything important? And I put that in there. If they don't have much to say, or if I said you really seem to be very distractible today, we talked about why that was, I might put that in that section too. Because to me, the more natural flow of the interventions is sort of what the client brought up and how he handled it, rather than separate it in 2 sections and say, here's what I did, and here's what the client said below it. But I'm not telling you, I'm not saying that's the rule you have to use.
The top box of our individual note says stressors,
Right.
right? So maybe would he put those as stressors?
Well, certainly that could be a place, like there's a pending divorce, that's a place the client reported,
I don't know.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, that's exactly where, well, if you look at this, keep coming back. Can't get away from it. Oh, yeah. Let me go through this. If you looked at the top of that sample note that I gave you, it said, I got a lot of slides, don't I? Sorry about this. New issues, stresses, extraordinary events presented today. It's right at the top of that form. So that's where I would bring up the things that maybe haven't been part of our natural conversation. The client talks about the fact that he got served by his lawyer today and he's all upset because of what's going on with the divorce or whatever. I'd write that stuff up there. And then down here is where we put more like what my discussion was with the person. I just use, and we mostly see the response to the intervention being sort of, what did we see, what was the impact sort of today on our discussion, or wasn't the client paying attention, but I like to turn that part over to the client and say, what do you think was most important? Do you have any questions? That sort of thing. That's what I do. I've never gotten in trouble for it. Didn't get fired for it, so it's at the bottom of my inbox. And this, like I said, forms a pretty good sequence to have many conversations. Now, I write in what I call a bulleted form. It doesn't mean literally bullets, but it's sort of sentences. So to try to sit and collaboratively document an open, flowing paragraph is almost impossible to do. We need to think about, okay, so these things in your form give us sort of places to do that. And like I say, there's places where I take over and I open it up to the client, though. Like for number 4, describe the intervention, the client might say, well, we also talked about, I really liked what you said about this. So now I know the client heard that, and so I'll put that in there, because the client wants it done.
How do you suggest we handle items or bullets that we, in our clinical judgment, don't think the client is ready to face head on?
Okay, we're going to talk about all of that.
Okay.
That's going to be all of those things we'll talk about after the break. Usually I like to have a co-presenter and I give them the hard questions and I can say things. Okay. So here's a note. So this is where we can see, does this look like your note? Maybe it's just the way I got it. So you have extraordinary events or stressors. Is this right? Yeah. Identified below. So I guess you could write it, but this person chose to do is say, I'm going to write it again, so look below, and that's where you can find it. Client behavior, client cooperative oriented. To me, that client behavior section is very much like what a typical, what you're going to replace some of that with is your mental status. With the exception of E&M coding for psychiatry, the real requirement for mental status is it was a significant change. You have to at least do that. If you want to put a mini mental status every time, you can do that. It's just, I'm just telling you it's more than what's actually. Staff interventions, ask open, closed questions. And one thing we do that I always find interesting is we use stock phrases that don't say anything. So client reported today for his scheduled individual sessions. Well, I know his name's on top. He's here. So I don't really need to say that, because if he wasn't here, I wouldn't be writing this note, right? So it just adds words, but that wastes time. And when you do it in front of a client, you're going to feel awkward and they'll start to go away. Ask open and closed questions. That's an unusual phrase, too, that I hear. I know what open questions are, and I know what, sort of targeted questions are. I'm not sure what a closed question is. But anyway, open closed question assess mood, symptoms, stressors, providing safe space for client, normalizing and I saw this statement a lot. One of these opening statements that said the reason they're here is so that I can create this environment and all that. And there's nothing wrong with putting it there. I'm just saying people are going to skip over that sentence pretty quickly and look for the meat of what you actually did. Reflected back to client use of skills, DBT, praising the client for her use of skills and sticking to her guns. Reflected back to the client our improved mood. So this is a person who's actually doing a pretty good job of documenting what they're doing. Looks like she was following up probably on some sort of plan section around the use of the DBT skills. Empathize with client over challenges when others are using manipulative behavior. Explore with client how her use of broken record for DBT was effective in achieving her ultimate goal. Only having sexual interactions with others using condoms. Then the client responds to intervention, and again, here we're doing a lot of redundant stuff, but it's because this person was trained to basically now report on what the client said. If you're going to use it that way, it would almost be good to reverse it, because the client probably said the stuff before you did your interventions, right? So sort of like, here's some of the things the client reported, and here's a discussion in the interventions we used. So at the very least, the order is backwards, if that's the way you're going to use it. But I would normally have this and this be more the conversation. But there's nothing wrong with this as long as you would also report, and I guess you're doing it under client behavior, whether they were particularly distracted today or out of control or that sort of stuff. So the content is there. Like I said, the effort is definitely there. It's not for people who aren't scrimping on it. As I say that, I think this is what can happen when you get backed up on your paperwork. Oh, here. And under progress, see, client is using DBT skills to keep her self-respect. Per DBT reports improvement in mood. So this is better than most, but she had specific objectives. It said she was going to raise her level of DBT skills from this to this. So we never talk about, we discussed the times that she used it. She actually was using it 5 times this week or 3 times this week as opposed to maybe just once. So we start to get back away from the objectives, which sends the message that we're really not tracking the actual objectives. That was just sort of the thing that we do for other people. And so we want a better connection there. But this is the same staff person, same client, and this was the note. Staff intervention, asked open, closed questions. Now what I suspect is that this is a template that this person uses that's always there. And somehow one of them got into the record without her filling out the rest of it. And it just sort of makes the point that these are kind of throwaway phrases because we can put them in before the client ever shows up. So if you can put things in before the client shows up, they probably need to.
On the previous slide, it talks about broken records with DBT. In your experience with auditors, especially RAC auditors, are they going to give us credit for knowing what we're talking about, or do we need to explain to them what we're talking about?
You don't need to explain to a record. You need definitions. If you're going to use anything in your record, you need to be able to show that there's an acceptable definition for what that is. So in DBT, that's one of the, it's a listed, strategy.
Would you explain broken record?
I would explain broken record in every.
But it would be understood that that's a legitimate DBT skill.
What's more important to me is that the client understands broken record. So when I see interventions that say use CBT today or use empathic listening, and the client doesn't know what it is, that's a problem for writing the note together. Like things like empathic listening kind of go away. Things like help the client process their feelings start to go away. I think of a KitchenAid feeling processor machine or something. What does that mean? You process your feelings. You probably had a discussion about how you felt and either validated it or didn't. So why don't you just put that in and say it's helpful to use empathic listening and help the client process their feelings. It doesn't tell another clinician what happened. You have no idea what really happened there. So you're better off we both had a conversation, we were both in the same room, heard the same words. Let's have a conversation about what we did that was helpful. And some places make you write DBT. I use DBT. I used, the facility policies. I want to know what evidence-based strategy you use and then describe it. If that's your policy, it's okay. Then I explain to the client. You know how we talk about how your beliefs can impact your emotions. That's what we mean by DBT. So if you see me write that, it's kind of what we're doing. And then, it's fine to put it in. But I saw this one, I was like, boy, that looks like a sparse note. Then I realized that this is a template that this person uses, so she doesn't have to keep rewriting these words.
I have a question related to the last one. In terms of writing for auditors, or not writing for auditors, but assuming being audited.
Satisfying.
Yes. Brevity versus elaboration, so they think you're doing all this work and they're happy to pay and all this stuff.
Yeah. So the requirement is that our documentation, aside from having to include certain elements, justify the time spent with the client. So people start writing tons of stuff where it gets to take as long to write the note as the session took. And that's not the requirement. There is no requirement. You'll get auditors that will come in and say, your notes are too short. You'll get another auditor that will come in and say, why are you writing all this? Your notes are too long. A good habit to get into is to say, that's a good suggestion. Could you show me the standard that calls for that? And a lot of times there isn't any standard. It's their interpretation, it's their pet peeve, whatever. Exactly. And they can't hold you accountable against things that aren't in the standards. But we can listen, and maybe it's good advice or not. The problem is when you get a one-sentence note, met with the client today, help them process their feelings, the client was cooperative, signed so-and-so. People are going to say, that doesn't convince me that it was worth spending 45 minutes with somebody. I've already seen effective use of, because I know what the interventions were, they'll say, we spend 20 minutes going through a relaxation exercise. I know that it's going to take at least 20 minutes to go through that particular relaxation exercise. Do I have to have them describe the whole process? No. And then they have other discussions as well. But the standard is that it has to, the documentation has to substantiate the amount of time spent with the client. So it's got to at least show that I could see that it would take 45 minutes to do what it is that you did. But the note can be succinct.
So is it worth putting time in brackets? So
Only for things that where it's really accepted. The time in brackets is only for things where we know what a particular strategy is and that it could take them. Or you could say, we then spend about 15 or 20 minutes role playing how she's going to respond when she goes home and tells her parents this thing. I could see that could take that long.
We've never had an auditor focus on something for not having time in there as long as the narrative.
Yeah, you're not yet.
And we have a nurse on the CSU, Phyllis Willingham. She can write one sentence and justify an hour. I promise.
Right.
And I have other people who can write pages and not justify.
Right. So it's not the volume. You don't get paid by the pound. It's really giving an indication that okay, I can see that this note, it was reasonable. Take 45 minutes. Because you're also writing what the client reported to you. You're writing, what your interventions were, the client response. But we don't have to get crazy with a lot of volume. Also, it's much less likely to get read. Fairly succinct notes that talk about that, what they're doing are more likely. If I do want to review what you did before I meet with the client, I really don't want to read a whole lot. I want to sort of get to what is it that actually happened there. Progress, okay. And the plan here is we'll meet with the client in 1 week to explore stressors, including broken record and further interactions. So she's sort of setting up, which is another thing you can do with the plan, what's going to be the focus of our next session. That's another good thing, particularly if you're giving them something to do or think about between now and then that's related to that. Also, like if a client wants to bring something up and you're getting to run out of time, so let's put in the plan section that we're going to make sure we remember to focus on that next time, because it's something that you want to discuss. Trying to see if there's anything new. See, this is a use of a plan that's not very helpful. Staff will continue to define on a weekly basis to work on goals delineated in the treatment plan. So that's just sort of saying we're going to keep meeting. But it's not giving the person anything to do, think about, anything like that. Yeah, so there's nothing, it's the same pattern here, so there's no sense in making you, especially for folks in the back. So here was like client behavior. Clients talk calmly with therapists during sessions, smiling frequently. So that's the kind of thing we'll see a lot during in the response to therapy section, where it's how did the client respond today. First line, So here we got the empathic listening. This client shared that she met, but this isn't just saying we used empathic listening. She's saying they use that, and she shared that she met her ex-husband when she was 17, blah, blah, blah. Now, you're going to have to explain to the client what empathic listening is if you're going to use it in collaborative documentation. You can just as easily forget the term and just talk about, because you can't listen empathically without saying something. Otherwise, it's just listening. So, as empathic as it may be, only you in your heart know you were being empathic. So what we want to do is say that we had a conversation about this and the therapist agreed, or understood that you felt this way. That's what empathic listening is. So the throwaway terms kind of aren't that helpful. And they'll tend to disappear when you collaboratively document because it's awkward. This is interesting. Care logic is out. We'll call the client with the next appointment. I thought this was some sort of clinical statement. So it's like a metaphysical kind of a care logic is out. I realize I got yeah, my care logic, more is documentation. Process emotions, again, throwaway term, work on insight, doubt patients' behaviors produce the same results. So you're going to find that the language naturally changes as you go through this. So I think it's actually, we can go a little further and take a break. It's always different after lunch. I'm fine. I can talk right through the end of the day and not give you any break. But we can either go through a little bit and then take a break and finish up. I'm going to get you out of here by 4:30 today. One way or the other. I'll just change how fast I talk. And then I'll be available after that because I really don't have anywhere to take a rush, so I can hang around here if people have individual questions they weren't comfortable asking. So what do you want to do? How many people want the break right now? How many people want to wait a couple minutes? What? I'm going to go for another couple minutes. Okay, so also this might be helpful because we're going to pose some questions, and I think it would be good maybe during the break for you guys to think about this anymore. So we can do this for adults, children, family therapy. It's used regularly and widely for the whole gamut. You can use it in group, and I promise I'm going to spend some specific time. We have some folks, some peer program here where they use a lot of groups, and substance abuse generally use a lot of groups. We want to talk about that. Community-based in homes and community settings, we can answer questions about that as well. So here's some of the things that we can, you know what, I'm going to skip this, and we're going to pose those right before the break. So the keys to successfully doing this. Now you can see we spent all day talking, I spent all day talking. And the actual progress note thing that you thought I was going to train you on took about 40 minutes. Okay, and it's not rocket science, it's not magic, but I'm hoping it was helpful today, talking about why we had to talk about treatment plans before we talk about progress notes, and why we had to talk about the assessments and the focus needs so that we can do the treatment plans collaboratively and quickly. And I'm always concerned that your compliance gets better, not worse, as a result of my being here. So a lot of times people think, now we're doing collaborative documentation, that's what's in now, so we can forget about a lot of the compliance rules. And I just really wanted to show how they fit together. But when you actually go out and do it, attitude is very important. So we don't want to say to the client, my organization's got this cockamamie idea that I got to write my notes. That sets the wrong tone. And I know you wouldn't do that, but what you might do is start to get apologetic. And you can't do that either. So we can't say, listen, I know this is different, I know it's going to be hard, but it'll get better. You know, that sounds like something someone's telling a 6-year-old when you're getting ready to get an injection. You know, what we want to do is explain. In the past, I've written about our sessions back in my office. Now I think it's important, since it's your record, for you to know what's in the record. And I think I'm writing these accurately, but maybe I'm not always. We want to make sure we're on the same page, that you can correct me. And if you disagree with anything I say, that you have the option to enter those, your perspective or disagreements. So from now on, at the end of the sessions, we're going to spend a couple of minutes, so that you can see what I'm actually putting in the note. So you want to do it that way. Don't get apologetic. As soon as we get apologetic, people get suspicious about what it is that we're doing. And we want them to go into the process with the best thing. Preparation, today's part of it. What you can do is take a look at some of the notes you wrote this week and say, I remember that session. how would I have done this if I was doing this collaboratively with a person? Would some of the wording here disappear? Would I focus on different things? Just to think through how you would do it. And then there's the CQI approach. It's going to improve. You know, I guarantee you're going to be much better at it 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now than you are now. And that's about how long time it takes to form a habit. So you're going into the session with that in mind and being prepared to do that instead of saying, I got to remember to do that, right? This is an arbitrary number, 7%, but it's one of the biggest reasons people don't implement. Because you're thinking about that one individual, that one situation, where how the heck would we ever do with this person? So don't let the exceptions be the rule, or drive the rule. I had a therapist, these are all true stories. I had a therapist a couple of months back. We were doing a follow-up to a training like this. And he said, I have this multiple personality client. We've identified 18 personalities so far. And in any session, I might talk to 2 or 3 personalities. And I can't let one personality know what the other one said. So I said, well, don't start with that guy. You know, and how many exotic cases do you have on your caseload? He said, well, that's the only one. I said, okay, maybe never do that. You know, but that shouldn't stop you from doing it. Another example, we trained a big organization out in Arizona in their office-based services, and it went very well, and they implemented it. And then they said, we have a big community service division. We want you to come back out with all laptops, we're all set. We go out there and we talk to the director of the program. He goes, I really don't know why they sent you here, because we have sandstorms in this part of Arizona. And the sandstorms will destroy the laptops. So I said, well, what are you doing out in the sandstorm? You know, and how about we just do collaborative documentation on non-sandstorm days? And don't do it, and we do it on the other 350 days. So people will think of our reason. In Arkansas, I work with an organization that has a big deaf community, partly because, you know, there's a deaf community and then services get put there, and so more deaf, so they have a fairly large deaf community and had a large deaf behavioral health program. And there's a place in my heart for the deaf. My granddaughter's deaf, but she got cochlear implants when she was 9 months old, so she's 100% hearing, 100% mainstream. You'd never know. She sings on key. It's like an amazing miracle. But in any event, they said, we can't do this with the deaf because the deaf culture wants you to face them the whole time so they can read your expression and read your lips. So at that time, I said, well, it's countercultural, don't do it. But why don't you ask them, explain it, and ask them. And they came back and they said, the client said we can read as well as anybody. So, you know, look at me when you're doing the therapy, but after that, I can read with your writing, I'll tap you on the shoulder. So we shouldn't make assumptions about where it's not going to work, make exceptions. Do it in all the easy places first, and you get confidence and you start doing the tougher cases. And I really believe you're going to see that some cases you're stuck on are going to get unstuck using this method. And we hear that all the time. I've been stuck with a person forever. This has sort of changed the whole thing because, like I said, it's sort of a magical thing for a lot of clients that they're actually getting to see what's in their record and contribute to it, and they take it much more seriously, in part because of that. Okay. These are in your handouts. There are some, we're going to skip these things. This is Dr. Kern. He's a medical director, psychiatrist. He trains with them as well. The psychiatry staff, he's been doing this. You can see he just turned his computer a little bit. He's got that keyboard. He's looking at her. You know, when he wants to type, he might look down. She can read it if she wants. You know, it's an informal kind of process. And these are just a sample. You'll never probably say it exactly this way because you have different clients at different levels. But it's a sample of how to introduce this process to people. You know your clients best, so you'll know how to introduce it. Again, just don't be apologetic. And then for new clients, it's basically the same, but you're just saying this is the way we do things here, and you're explaining the process. Organizations that get past critical mass, where pretty much everyone is doing this, very often start to develop brochures for their programs, explaining collaborative documentation, the benefits of it, why they do it. And it's a good PR piece also, because it's talking about real person-centeredness and the orientation of the organization. You also have to remember to leave that set to 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, because if you only leave 2, you're not going to have time to do this. So you do have to pace yourselves It also forces us to do the clinical wrap up. I think a lot of times we don't do it because we run out of time. If we're going to start saying, I like collaborative documentation, I want to get this note done, it'll force us to do a thing we should have been doing all along anyway, which is summarizing the session for the plan. Okay. We'll talk about the pilot later. So here's some questions, and we're going to take a break before we answer them, because I want you to add your own. So one thing is, what if I introduce to the client, he or she says, I don't want to do this. Sounds like a bad idea to me. Another is, what if I have a different perspective than the client? Another is, what if the client says they don't want me to write something in their chart? How do I document something I don't want the client to see? So in other words, I think that gets to your question about if you're in a certain stage of treatment and there's something I don't think your client's ready to hear, what do I do? I'm not answering any of these now, it's after the break. It's like American Idol. What if a client's too cognitively impaired to participate in this process? And then the last one I'm not going to answer, I'll do my best with questions, but if the children's group would like, I'm pretty sure we've got hours in the contract to get them on a call with Catherine. She knows my whole presentation, so she'll know the context. She can just answer your specific questions around strategies with kids. I know you've got other questions, or you may, but I wanted to let you know the ones that we'll be addressing for you, and then and I'm also going to go over the group process. And other than that, any other questions, I'll upgrade. Okay? So we'll get back in 15 minutes.